Play, 2 seconds. I think we're recording.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to do the housekeeping for me, please?
I can do. Bear with me. Prior to commencement of business of the committee, can I just remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording will be archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up or use the raise hand function? Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and/or to grab the attention of the chair or Democratic Services Officer. And if any participant is having difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing committee, then they should let the chair or Democratic Officer know. If they have a webcam, then they should try turning this off, as this will help with broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth so they can at least hear and be heard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. Right, okay, good evening, everybody. The first business for this evening is the appointment of an honorary vice chair from the representatives of the voluntary sector for the rest of this year. Do we have any nominations, please? Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, indeed. Linda Newton, and I was expecting her here. I was in touch with her about an hour ago, and she has agreed to accept the nomination.
Right. Excellent.
So she should be here, Chair. Must be delayed technical issues,
okay.
maybe.
No, don't worry. So apologies for absence then, please, which we've had from William Hennessy and no one else.
So no other apologies received at present, Chair, but can I just ask, I think if there's a resolution to appoint the honorary vice chair, could we have a move in a second, please?
Oh, right, okay. I have to say that's not normal, but I'm happy to go with it. All right, so are we all happy to? Well, the thing is, it's only the voluntary sector that can actually pronounce on this, isn't it? So, isn't it? It's not up to the rest of the committee, is it? It's only the voluntary sector that are actually involved.
If it's not usually done, that's probably my error then, Chair, and I do apologise.
No, don't worry. I'm just trying to sort this out, because it would only be people from the voluntary sector that can actually make a comment on this anyway, isn't it?
That is probably correct, in which case this is my error, and please ignore any intervention on my part.
Hayley.
I would second the nomination.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, so are we all generally happy to accept Linda as the vice chair, please? If anyone
all happy.
Right, we're all happy. Right, thank you very much. Okay, if you've gone through apologies, if we look at the minutes for the 30th of November, are people happy to accept those as a true record, please?
Yes, happy to accept.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, anybody got anything that they wish to bring up in the minutes that is not already on the agenda, please? No? Okay. Declarations of interest, please. No? All right then, let's look at the reports then, please. The first one is Audit Wales, third sector partnership working, and obviously it's about us. And I'm going to hand over to Tom at this point.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, committee. Yes, this report is on your agenda. It was also on the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee agenda previously as well. And we're bringing this to you as we do all our regulatory audit reports that we receive prior to them going to Governance and Audit Committee and then on to Cabinet. And the reason, Chair, for bringing this one to your committee this evening is because it is specifically about our relationship with the third sector. Little bit of background, we always have some planned work done in conjunction with Audit Wales every year as part of the regulatory work that they do with the organisation. We agree the programme of that activity, and it felt timely when we were looking at the previous year's audit work to explore the relationship with the third sector following our really positive experiences during the pandemic. So the report that Audit Wales have completed is appended to this report for you to see and to consider this evening. They make a series of what are called proposals for improvement. They're not formal recommendations, but they're proposed ways that the authority should respond to the findings of the Audit Wales work. And they are relatively procedural in some areas, so they talk about us looking at the checklist that accompanied a previous national study that they did, and I brought to your committee a number of years ago. So they've asked us to look at some particular aspects of that checklist. They also reflect that we should be reviewing the compact that we have with GVS, and that's something that we are committed to doing in the coming year, and I've spoken with Rachel previously about doing that piece of work, and we'll move on to that. It makes a proposal around considering the level of resource and investment required in the third sector as well, and also what the local authority can do to help the third sector to adjust to a more collaborative way of working, building, as I say, on that positive relationship that has become even more so during the pandemic. And what I wanted to just run through briefly with you, Chair, this evening is our proposed response to this piece of work. And ordinarily, I would work with colleagues to develop an action plan that I would append to this report, and you'd see the 5 or 6 things that we were going to do in order to address those proposals. But this piece of work feels somewhat different. There's a cultural angle to this, and there's a whole organisational angle as well. And I've really welcomed the honest conversations that Rachel and I have had as part of developing our response to this. GVS colleagues were involved in the audit work as well. They spoke with Audit Wales directly, and I think you can see the influence and the maturity of our relationship reflected in this report. And what we're proposing is that rather than have a procedural action plan, that we embark on a series of engagement pieces of work now over the coming months in order really to explore how we can take this relationship to the next level. And that would consider things like the checklist and possibly a strategy, and it will definitely consider the level of resources, but I think it's more than that. What it needs to do is reflect the breadth of the sector. So we've got very big not-for-profit profit organisations that colleagues may commission services from. We've also got, at the other end of that spectrum, small community groups, either by geography or by interest, who are working at the very grassroots of our communities. And this piece of work needs to explore how, as an organisation, we interact and respond to that whole breadth, and to do so consistently where it's appropriate, but also using our values, I think, to guide that work. So the proposal is that we establish a task and finish group of council officers who will start to explore some of these issues, and that we would bring periodical updates to yourselves and to Corporate Performance and Resources Committee, so we can start to tease out some of the issues around capacity, the organisation's capability in dealing with that breadth of services. And I'm really pleased that there's a genuine willingness on behalf of all of the colleagues that I've spoken to across the council so far to further enhance this relationship. So what I want to do is explore how we do that, but not fixate on having one strategic document at the end of it necessarily. It's more about the process than it is about the product here. So we've had some initial conversations with the Wellbeing of Future Generation Commissioner's Office about some possible ways of approaching this particular piece of work. Most recently spoke with them last week, and that was a really informative discussion around how perhaps we can explore different types of relationships through some case studies and do some reflective learning on each of them to see how that could fit together. I'm keen that some of this conversation is facilitated by an external third party to provide some independence, some expertise, and to give confidence to those people who are participating that the organisation is taking this seriously. And I think there's definitely a role for your committee, Chair, alongside the relationship we have with GVS outside of a formal committee, and also our public services board partners as well, because this is something that all of the public sector needs to be taking forward. So the idea is that, as I say, that task and finish group will establish a programme of engagement work, looking to co-produce that wherever possible with colleagues in the third sector. And as I say, I'm very grateful to Rachel and colleagues at GVS who've provided some input and advice so far. And we will build on those conversations in further developing the next iteration of the compact as well. To give you some reassurance, Chair, we are taking this seriously. It's going to be enshrined within the forthcoming annual delivery plan for the organisation. So there is some fire under my feet to make sure that it happens, because I'll be regularly reporting as part of that, and also playing into the Council's transformation programme reshaping, because our relationship with the third sector is absolutely integral to working with our community, reshaping with our resources and reshaping how we work as well. So it's absolutely going to be put at the heart of that work. When I presented this report to Corporate Performance and Resources Committee last week, they asked me if I would make sure that I made your committee aware of their conversation, and I know that the formal minutes have not yet been produced. So a kind of summary, I guess, is that the committee seemed broadly welcoming of the approach that we were going to, that we were proposing, and that they did feel that there was a need for the committee of that you're chairing to have the role strengthened in order that this work could then be scrutinised going forward. The committee recognised that the third sector has been under huge pressure and capacity has been an issue, and it was important that we worked collaboratively and objectively together on this piece of work. And also, one of the committee members said that it was going to be really important to take this opportunity to learn about how we could establish better ways to consult and engage with organisations and the community as a whole in the Vale of Glamorgan. It was important as well to make sure that we were tight on the definition that we were using when we were describing the third sector, and again, I'm grateful to GVS for providing some advice on what the starting point should be there. And then finally, the committee asked if the GVS annual report could be taken to Corporate Performance and Resources Committee as a matter of course, and I know my colleagues in Democratic Services are linking in with colleagues at GVS to do that, and I took that as a really positive sign that the committee wanted to get involved in this work and to understand the interface between our organisation and the third sector. So apologies, that's been me speaking quite a lot about what the report covers, but bringing it here for your consideration this evening, Chair, to reflect any committee comments before they go on to Audit and Governance Committee.
Thank you very much. I will say I have had the highlights offered to me by the Chair already, who was slightly surprised that we were hearing about it after Corporate Resources, but there we are. Timing is everything on these things, isn't it? So, right, I'd like to invite people's comments, please. Right, we'll start with Christine, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Tom, for an update. I've got several questions, actually. First of all, you spoke about, as did the report, about the strengthening of the role of this committee from something other than what it currently is to possibly a scrutiny role, and I wondered what you had in mind there going forward. I also wondered where you were going to draw members for the task and finish group, because you spoke about setting up a task and finish group, and I wondered where members would come from. I also had a question. I looked at the 2017 report and can see that I think we've spoken to about 1,000 people or stakeholders generally, and that's such a small fraction of who the council represent. And I just wondered what plans we have to try and have a percentage of, a greater percentage of participants in any work we do going forward. And it is this is a really important committee for the voluntary sector. I do wonder why the voluntary sector's GVS annual report isn't given to all committees, and that the links with all other committees are not strengthened in some way. So they're my initial observations there and a few questions.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask Rachel to come in and then we'll go back to Tom?
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, we have welcomed this report from Audit Wales. I think it's vitally important that we do actually make sure that we've got that collaborative and co-producing approach towards this piece of work. I think otherwise we could fall foul of some of the usual or historic practices with statutory sector. I'm thinking in particular of health, where the third sector are pulled in after things have been decided and just asked yay or nay, do you agree with it or not? So I think Tom's right. It's absolutely vital that we do get third sector involved right at the beginning. And to answer Christine's point, happy to take our annual report any way you want me to take it. And I have had an invitation to attend a scrutiny committee. So that came in this afternoon from Karen. So you are moving on that, that's for sure. The work that the Audit Wales undertook, I think, has highlighted quite a few things for us as well as for our partners in the local authority. There was this mad surge, a very welcome and inspirational surge of volunteers between March and June 22. We saw, 1,000+% increase in the numbers of volunteers coming through. We're not at that level post-July 2020, but we are considerably higher with the numbers of volunteers accessing our services than we were pre-March 2020. So the numbers of people coming forward to volunteer remains high, not as high as that tremendous peak, but I think we all understand why that has happened. And it is truly, truly important that we really do capture that enthusiasm and that willingness to support all sorts of community activity that is coming through and continues to come through from the population here in the Vale. And Councillor Cave's point on getting more people to engage in surveys, it's a turn-off, unfortunately, and you do tend to get your usual suspects coming forward. I think Tom and his team have tried lots of different approaches in connection with colleagues in health and also ourselves, but it is a real challenge getting to engage with the population on things that we view as partners as very important and are indeed very important to the local population, but perhaps not top of their list of priorities to spend time on answering a questionnaire. Thank you, Chair.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? Thank you. Okay, so could Christine and Rachel take their hands down, please? It's just confusion for me otherwise. Does anybody else want to come in with a point, please? No? Okay, I'm going to... Minnie, did you want to say something? No? Okay. Can I take you back to you then, please, Tom? Well, Christine raised some points, and obviously I think we're all interested in the constitution of the task and finish group.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Cave, for the questions. In terms of the task and finish group, initially I was thinking that this would be council officers and also colleagues from the third sector, and I'd welcome a conversation with Rachel about identifying some colleagues, whether that's just DVS initially or whether we look to broaden that out in terms of scope. And the reason for doing that, I suppose, is that the initial phase of work for the task and finish group is to scope that engagement piece of work. And what I would expect to come from that is then a broader involvement of different organisations, different representatives and potentially elected members at that point in terms of developing that understanding. Very much kind of doing this in an iterative way so that we don't plan everything out, because I don't know what we're necessarily going to be reaching at the end of things. And I think that partly then plays into the answer around strengthening the role of this particular committee. And I think the very important piece of work that we need to do needs to come here regularly for updates, so your committee chair can influence and shape some of that work, definitely. I think there are opportunities, for example, to, as we start to redefine the compact with GVS, to be providing regular updates to your committee on the progress of that and the actions that are being taken, so that there is more of a scrutinising the way that, for example, that compact is being delivered. And also, I think there's possibly a role about where we identify certain pieces of activity for your committee to be scrutinising that activity, but also to be then the catalyst for making sure we learn lessons that we can use elsewhere in the organisation. The point Councillor Cave raised around greater participation, and Rachel partly answered this. Absolutely, it's something that has been a particular challenge during the pandemic when we've been doing things in a digital way. I'm pleased with the responses we've had to some of the surveys, for example, the wellbeing survey, where we've had just over 1,100. In terms of the number of respondents, absolutely, Councillor Cave is right. It's not necessarily representative of our population, and it's only less than 1%. But in relative terms, it's relatively high. And I think the public participation strategy that the Council's Cabinet approved on the 24th of February for consultation sets out our ambition to explore lots of different ways of engaging with the population on a cyclical basis, so that actually what we don't do is just consult on a document at the end of a process. We should be involving and engaging people much earlier on in the process. And I think there's something that I'm very keen to do, which is to build on what my service has been doing in recent years, which is building up a body of insight or understanding through a range of different activities that we can then use to help shape our policies. But it's definitely something that there is further work to be done from. And the final point around the annual report in terms of visibility of GVS's work, perhaps if your committee were minded to make that a formal recommendation, Chair, there's the route of taking it through the scrutiny cycle, or perhaps it could be formally reported to your committee and Corporate Performance and Resources Committee, and then shared with all elected members. And I know Rachel shares it with the Public Services Board partners as well, so that might give the coverage without Rachel having to attend 6 scrutiny committees.
No, I'm all for greater visibility of the committee. I think that certainly corporate resources and is it called Economy and the Environment now? They keep renaming that committee. That committee. I don't know whether education is so useful, but all committees should be aware of it. I mean, it's like the stuff we had on mental health last year. That should have gone to every single committee, because everybody is affected by all of these things. You know, it's like we all need to be financially literate about what's going on in the council. Sorry, right, Christine.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Rachel, for your response to the questions that I raised. I do think in terms of taking the report to every committee, I realise that would be quite burdensome for you, but I think it would be really invaluable for the council. Because actually, even education, you know, our young people, their mental health at the moment is particularly suffering post COVID world. And I do think, you know, again, every committee could see this document as valuable if they were helped to do so. And I think just making it available to every member doesn't really have much impact. It has much more impact actually at the committees. I'd also like to just come back on the task and finish group. You actually say about participation that we should start talking to people earlier, and then you say with the task and finish group you're just going to talk very quietly, or not very quietly, but with 2 parties, and I don't think that's helpful. It certainly isn't the approach of the task and finish group for the Homes and Safer Communities Committee, which their task and finish group actually finishes this week. And that was made up of members of the Homes Committee, although they also have a scrutiny role and will themselves be looking at it. So I think you could actually learn from what you've just said about participation and look more widely in the very early stages of setting up a task and finish committee. And I don't think you'll be helping anyone if you keep it within the council and the voluntary sector alone. I just add one final point on your participation figures. In research, for participation, it's generally known that when you go out and do a survey with the general public, response levels are very low. For something to be meaningful statistically, in other words, for your findings to actually be valid, you need about 14%. And so 1%, we're woefully behind there. I understand why, but I'm just drawing this to everybody's attention.
Right. Well, I think that's a concern. Christine is raising a concern, isn't it, about the number of people who take part? And Rachel has said that people find filling questionnaires and so forth, filling them in, burdensome, which I can understand, having come out of education where you're constantly filling in questionnaires about all sorts of stuff. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts about the best way to promote public engagement and engagement of people working within the voluntary sector, Tom. You don't have to answer that now, but I think it's a point that we're raising out of concern, because if we're claiming that we're representing large numbers of people's views, and in fact we're not, then that would leave us open to criticism, and I'm sure that none of us want that. We're looking for opinion to be kind of like secure in the numbers, or in the information we've had from as many people as possible. So whether there's a way of tackling people and getting them to ask questions which they don't find burdensome, time consuming, boring or whatever, I think that's something that the task and finish group would want to look at, I'm sure. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. Tom, when you took out the survey, was it only a digital survey you did, or was there talking to people, or how did you go about it? Because I was thinking a lot of people who depend on our voluntary services don't have access to digital technology. A lot of the elderly people or people with financial difficulties now don't have the internet, they don't have access, and therefore they're unable to express any opinions. So how did you go about getting this survey, please?
I think the survey that Councillor Cave was referring to was a number of years ago, Councillor Norman. So if I may answer in terms of where we are currently in terms of the way that we're encouraging people to participate and to consult. We do it in a range of ways. During COVID, we haven't been able to do the traditional face-to-face consultation and engagement work that I'm hopeful we can get back to doing more of very soon, and being able to take that out into communities. And I think we will always offer the ability for people to telephone us to complete a survey through the council's contact centre, in addition to doing something online for exactly the reasons, Councillor Norman, that you raise in terms of people having access to the internet, computer and digital literacy. So whilst we've been restricted during COVID, certainly, it has also given us an opportunity to explore different ways of using digital technology. And I know that as we move forward, there's something as well about supporting people to be able to engage digitally as well as doing that face-to-face, but with the acknowledgement that things like the telephone should always be available to people as well. And I think Councillor Caves makes a very, very important point in terms of the statistical meaning of a body of research and evidence, and I think that we're always going to strive to want to encourage more people to participate in individual exercises. Absolutely, and that's what some of that public participation strategy is about, is in terms of the methods and promoting the opportunity. But there's also something about, we talk to lots and lots of people on lots of different topics. and it shouldn't be beyond us to join some of those activities up. So we might ask about one issue, but the findings might help us inform another issue as well. So I think there's something about using the collective intelligence that we get from a range of different participation methods in order to inform our work. And certainly, Chair, if your committee were minded to recommend that the Task and Finish group perhaps involved a couple of representatives of your committee in order to help shape that initial phase of the engagement work, and that was the reason for suggesting initially that it would be drawn in effect internally and with some officers from GVS. If that's something that your committee were minded to do, that's an incredibly positive thing, and certainly then sets us on the right path. So yeah, would be absolutely open to that.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I'd like to come back on that. I mean, I think that if you're going to be picking up councillors to volunteer, then I think you're going to be waiting till after May, because I think it would be short-sighted of any councillors to volunteer now, not knowing whether we are going to be actually present in order to carry out our tasks. So yeah, I mean, I think council officers and third sector volunteers getting it off the ground, and then we can come in and offer whatever expertise we may have, because obviously some of us also work with voluntary groups and so forth, or certainly aware of what they're doing. Okay, thank you. Linda.
Sorry, I didn't want to, I just wanted to back Tom up really, and just to say, not to add too much to it, just to say the voluntary sector could help with organising focus groups and linking with, like Rihanna saying, people with lived experience we're in contact with. We're happy to help with that. And I just know the central office now, I mean, they get people to fill in questionnaires by giving them money, don't they? You've offered money to do them, so it is hard to get lots of people. That's the way it seems to be going, isn't it?
Well, that's depressing, but on the other hand, if that's the way to go forward, then that's going to have to be done, isn't it? Thank you for that, and congratulations on being vice chair, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
You missed your moment of glory, so I'm offering it to you now.
Thank you. I'm sorry I was late.
No, don't worry. Don't worry. Okay, Tom, did you want to come back on that, or shall we formulate?
No, thank you very much to Linda for that.
Right. Okay. Now, Christine suggested that we might want to circulate the minutes or the reports that we receive at this meeting to other committees. I don't know how other people feel about that. I think if you're happy with that, I'm all happy with the idea. I'm going to discuss it with Democratic. Yeah, does anybody want to come back on that point?
I think that would be a very good idea, Chair.
Right, okay. So, Catherine, if we can discuss that then. We could set
so
up
yeah, if we were to refer anything formally, that would have to be a resolution in meeting, but we can certainly discuss circulation to committees as appropriate.
Right, okay. I'll have that conversation with Catherine then. Okay, Tom, if there's nothing else you want to add to that, thank you very much for your help. Are you going to be offering us the Bowler Glamorgan Public Sector Services Board report as well?
I am, but I'm
oh,
going to be
a double dose. We are lucky tonight.
But I promise I'm joined by my learned colleague Helen Moses this evening.
All right.
So you don't just have to listen to me all evening. I don't know. We've got a short slide deck if you're happy for us to project that, Chair. That will just walk you through the report. So if you're content, I'll ask Helen to pop those slides up.
Yes, please. Great,
thank you. So just while Helen is doing that for us, thank you for taking this item on the wellbeing assessment for the Public Services Board. So this is being brought to your committee during the consultation process on this assessment, and we just wanted to do a few things this evening. Firstly, give you a little bit of an overview in terms of what the Public Services Board is, because this is separate to the council. It's one of our partnerships. We'll talk you through what the wellbeing assessment is, what it needs to do, how we've gone about it. importantly, we'll summarise what findings have been made from the assessment, and there's an opportunity at this point for colleagues to also tell us what you think as part of the consultation exercise that is currently running. So just a very brief recap in terms of the PSB and what the role is. Public Services Boards were established as part of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in 2016. The idea is that it brings senior leaders from the public and third sector organisations across the county together to work in partnership. And the importance is, I guess, that the PSB exists in a space where working collectively and collaboratively to tackle issues is what it looks to do. It doesn't look to duplicate or replicate existing services, but to bring them together. The purpose is that it produces an assessment every 5 years, excuse me. Slightly hoarse, I've been talking all day. So it has to produce an assessment of well-being in the county, and that needs to consider economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being across the area. The idea is that the assessment gives you the findings, and then a plan is produced to respond to those findings that the PSB can take forward. So that's the point that we're at now. And while my voice goes really croaky, I'm going to hand over to Helen to talk to you about what it needs to cover.
Thanks, Tom. So in terms of the guidance that's issued by Welsh Government to shape the wellbeing assessment, there are a number of requirements. So as Tom has said, we need to look at economic, environmental, social and cultural wellbeing. So basically we have to look at everything, and what Welsh Government says at the point of the assessment is where you look at all those different issues, and then when you come to the plan you can narrow it down based on the information that's come through that assessment. So as part of the assessment we have to look at the Vale as a whole, but we also then have to look at the different communities that make up the Vale as well. So for the purposes of the wellbeing assessment, we followed the same pattern as for the previous one, and we've looked at the Vale-wide issues, but we've also, where possible, looked at them in terms of Barry, Eastern Vale and Western Vale, and then drilled down to a more community level as well, where that data is available. And we're sort of trying to understand what things might look like on a geographical basis, but also what things mean for individuals and for communities across the Vale. We have to pull in a whole range of information, so certain national indicators we have to look at and link to other assessments as well, so things like the childcare sufficiency audit, place efficiency audit, climate change risk assessment and the population needs assessment that's currently being undertaken by the Regional Partnership Board. We've also got to look at sort of where we can future trends and issues to help shape what our figures are telling us, what our information is telling us and what that might mean for the plan as well, and really try and bring that all together into an assessment that we can engage with, but also that other people find as a useful resource as well, and that tells that story really of the Vale now, but also looking forward to the future. So it's quite a challenge for us, and we've been working on this now for a number of months with our partners, and we brought all our initial findings to a workshop with public sector partners in November to make sure everyone was happy to sign off that draft for the consultation, which has now been running from mid-January and finishes middle of this month. At the end of the consultation, we'll pull all the comments and feedback together, and that will include detailed feedback from Welsh Government and the Future Generations Commissioner's Office as well, to feedback really for discussions within the Public Services Board, so we can make sure each of those individual organisations are happy to sign off the assessment before we collectively sign that off for publication in April. And as then Tom says, we then really are starting to already think about what this means for the wellbeing plan and what will that look like for the PSB. In terms of the approach that we've taken, as I say, it's quite a complicated process for us to pull all of this information together and be able to sort of present it in a usable format. So for those of you that have had an opportunity to look at the assessment in a bit more detail, you can sort of enter it, and it's an online version through the View of the Vale Glamorgan part of the assessment, and that's really a bit of an introduction to the assessment, setting it out, but also the conclusion in terms of the key findings as well. And that's the element of the assessment that we would expect probably most people will engage with. That's supported by the more detailed findings in our themed reports. We've got one that very much looks at the population information and demographics, one that looks at education, employment and the economy, another on health and community, so that would include community safety, and then one that looks at the environment and transport. And that's really just a way of trying to manage and present the information in terms of setting that out. But across all of these themed documents, we've looked at engagement information, both the engagement that the PSB has undertaken or that has been undertaken by others, to really pull a much greater pool of information together for us. We're looking at our assets and strengths within the Vale, as well as the issues, the impact of COVID, and again thinking about what the national wellbeing goals are for all this. And as I was saying earlier, again think about all those different impact assessments that we need to bring together to help shape the assessment itself. So it's a wide range of research data and evidence, which might be sort of UK-wide, Wales-wide, Vale-wide, and some that we've undertaken ourselves. So as part of the work to develop the assessment, we ran a survey in the summer, the Let's Talk survey. So again, when we did the last assessment, we were able to be out and about talking to people. You know, we were at things like the Vale Show, we were down Barry Island, we stood outside supermarkets on a Saturday morning having those conversations and went to a range of meetings. That hasn't been possible this time, so we have very much had to rely on this survey, but also, as I say, we've looked at other engagement exercises that have been undertaken by our different partners and by others, like for example the Children's Commissioner as well. So we've had, as I say, probably a better response than we thought we might have had in terms of the limitations that we've got, and this is, as I say, helping to shape the assessment. But we're hoping now, as we do the engagement and consultation to feed into the plan, we'll be able to go out and have those conversations on a wider scale. So some of the information that's come through that survey has shown that actually 83% of the respondents were either fairly or very satisfied with the Vale of Glamorgan as a place to live, so a real positive there. Again, we can see that people are reporting loneliness, people being concerned about increases in crime, and also people being concerned about climate change and thinking things are worsening. We also see as well in terms of people thinking about worsening financial circumstances and people that struggle to afford food. So that's given us again some information here that's sort of been quite personal in terms of some of the responses that people have given to us on some of those issues that we'll continue to explore. So just to take you then sort of moving away from the process now a bit more to sort of what we've found in terms of pulling all that information together, both the data and the engagement. What we've found is that really for many wellbeing in the Vale of Glamorgan is good against a range of indicators, so in terms of good educational outcomes overall, earnings above the Welsh national average, and people in good health and say being satisfied with where they live. But that experience isn't consistent, and that's probably one of the benefits of doing an exercise like this, is looking at that below Vale-wide level at some of those combinations of factors that affect people's lives. So we can see that in certain, both for individuals and within certain communities, there's prevalence around financial hardship, poorer health or higher rates of crime, and also exposure to environmental risk. As I said, we've pulled quite a bit of information together in terms of the impact of the pandemic, and again what we're conscious of is data is becoming more available all the time and new research, but it is showing in terms of people being disproportionately affected by the pandemic and the increased pressures that we found, and that probably those people who were struggling before have struggled even more in terms of the various impacts of the pandemic. There's also a strong theme coming through both in the data and some of the findings of the survey around the climate and nature emergency and the need to act now and the impact that will have. And probably again, no surprise that we've identified that people living in more rural communities do have greater difficulty accessing some services and transport and feeling more isolated. So just in terms of some of the things that kind of cut across the various different themes and sort of will have a wider impact on partners and services, we have got a growing population. So the population was estimated to be 135,295, with a significant growth in recent years, and we're also waiting now to have more information coming through the recent census. We've got an ageing population, so again sort of significant growth in the population aged 65 and over, and considering what the implications are for us in terms of different services and whether that's more health related services for people as they get older, but also in terms of people wanting to work or volunteer or wanting access to a range of different sort of leisure and social activities as well. A number of our lower super output areas across the Vale, we can see that, you know, are measured in the Wales Index of Multiple Deprivation. So we can see where there's more experience of deprivation, and these are located in the east of Barry. And what also comes through in the information is that actually in terms of the proportion of the population being younger in those areas as well. And again, as I was saying, in terms of the impact of the pandemic on different people. We're just going to take you through a couple of the key points in the different themed reports, and these are really probably just a bit of a snapshot, because again, if you've had a chance to look at the detailed reports, you'll see there's a whole wealth of information here, but we've tried to draw out some of the positives and some of the aspects of concern that have been coming through. So, for example, the number of pupils who are eligible for free school meals, that has grown from 2,478 in 18-19 to just under 3,500 in 2021. As we're saying, back to the issues around sort of our more deprived communities, we can see that the LSOAs in Barry are more deprived in the education domain, and that Barry has a higher proportion of people aged 16 to 64 with no qualifications than LSOAs in the East and Western Vale. In terms of thinking about sort of the expansion in terms of apprenticeships, majority of these are in the healthcare and public services sector. Employment is consistently above the Welsh employment rate. So again, one of the positives there. And in terms of the employment industries, we're looking at human health and social work, wholesale and retail trade, education, accommodation and food service activities. And we can also, from information that's been provided through Cardiff and Vale College, around where the sectors where there's forecast to be a growth in jobs. And again, we can see again, it's some of the same areas that are coming through in terms of the different domains of the Wales Index of Multiple Deprivation. In terms of the claimant count, again, that we're seeing increases in there across age groups and different areas. And again, these are some of the areas where we can see that figures do sort of fluctuate over the time, and keeping on top of some of that data. And one of our tasks now, sort of post-assessment, is how we have that robust evidence base. House prices have been consistently higher than the Welsh average, so although that can be a positive for some people, for others that becomes even more difficult as rents and house prices continue to increase. And we also can see where there's sort of issues around some of the quality of the housing that we have, and in terms of homelessness as well, and the impact that the pandemic has had on that. So I'm just going to hand back to Tom now, who's going to take you to the next couple of slides, really in terms of some of the conclusions and the other themes.
Thank you, Helen. So yeah, absolutely. So building in terms of health and communities, there are really good initial health indicators that children appear to be laying the foundations for good health and well-being throughout their life. We also see that there are higher rates of higher harmful nitrogen dioxide in more deprived areas. And this is building on that picture that Helen was just describing in terms of the differences across the county. There's definitely concern around the impact of COVID on children and young people. We're seeing increasing causes for concern around mental health. The average life expectancy in the Vale of Glamorgan is higher than average, but again is lower in more deprived areas. Particularly in the Western Vale, drinking is above the guidelines and is a cause for concern. And there's also been a drop in the number of people eating 5 fruit and vegetables a day, and that's been consistent over a number of years. Again, building on this difference across the county, there's fewer people who live in more deprived areas are likely to engage in healthy behaviours and most likely to experience poor health outcomes. And just to give some quantum to the picture, 4,644 people were fed by the Vale Food Bank between July 2020 and July of 2021. People do indicate that they're satisfied with where they live, and that's above the Welsh average, and Vale residents are more likely to volunteer and engage in arts and cultural activities. The Vale records lower numbers of total crime, but there has been a rise in antisocial behaviour and domestic abuse, and that's a particular cause for concern. And as you may expect, because of the rurality within the Western Vale, there are higher return travel times to accessing key services and also poorer internet coverage there. Older people in the Vale of Glamorgan experience better health than the Welsh national average. But there's also, as Helen was talking about initially, a heightened risk of older people in the Western Vale experiencing issues around loneliness and isolation. And older people have also been identified as one of the high-risk groups of experiencing poor mental health, particularly as a result of the pandemic. And with an ageing population, the number of people living with dementia is also anticipated to increase into the future as well. Looking at the environment and transport headlines, the volume of road traffic in the Vale of Glamorgan has been consistently growing. It peaked in 2019. As you'd expect, there was a fall back in 2020. But detailed commuting patterns show that the majority of commuters both live and work in the Vale of Glamorgan. Rail journeys have been growing year on year, but bus and coach journeys have been falling across Wales. And that's also obviously been exacerbated and changed by the nature of the pandemic. And we do see that access to public transport is a particular issue in the more rural areas of the Vale of Glamorgan. Carbon emissions playing into the decarbonisation agenda from transport outgrew domestic emissions in 2014 and are therefore the second highest emitter of CO2 in the area. And there's also, based on some recent data, a paucity of publicly available electric charging devices when compared to all other local authorities in Wales within the Vale of Glamorgan. Active travel, so travelling by walking and cycling, is higher than in many other areas. But we also see, based on CO2 emissions, that they've been consistently above the Welsh average, and that's been the case for 16 or so years. Most areas in the Vale of Glamorgan have got decent proximity to accessible green space, but access is poorer in more rural areas. And we've seen that the results of the Let's Talk survey highlight particular areas of concern for the future around green spaces, with respondents answering the most environmental factors they anticipate to worsen in the coming 5 years. Climate change is also likely to result in significantly increased risks of wildfires, coastal erosion and tidal and fluvial flooding. And the assessment picks out that Palmerston community area is within the top 50 areas most at risk from flooding in Wales. And that aligns with data from the Wales Index of Multiple Deprivation, which says that located within the Palmerston community area has the highest flood risk score, and that residents in those areas may be at a higher disadvantage risk than other areas from flooding. So that's the picture in terms of environment and transport. And I'm conscious that Helen and I have just been giving committee a huge range of different pieces of data and information. And as I say, the view from the Vale of Glamorgan report summarises those and provides access into the various detailed reports for members to be able to access and use. And I wanted to provide, Chair, some assurance to your committee and to other councillors across the organisation that this is a really important piece of work for the Public Services Board, but it is also incredibly useful for the council as a whole. And we are using it, for example, to reflect into the annual delivery plan that will be coming to Cabinet and to full council at the beginning of March, which is setting out these 6 themes for activity coming forward into 2022-23. So looking at using this data around how it informs our tackling climate change plans, looking at through the lens of hardship and tackling inequality. So how do we best design services to go about addressing needs for support and advice? With particular relevance to your committee, Chair, again, how do we involve and listen to the community and understand the different concerns from different parts of our community, and how does that shape the work? Again, around infrastructure, there are clear links to the way that we develop our response to environmental and infrastructure development and access to services, respecting the fact that the Vale of Glamorgan is a very diverse place. Transformation is a theme within the annual delivery plan, and this data and evidence is providing us with very useful insight in terms of how, as an organisation, we need to change the way that we work. For example, how we look to better collaborate and embrace change, and also the importance around using this data when we're looking at designing services that care and support for people who are the most vulnerable in society. Again, looking at how people experience different services across different parts of the Vale of Glamorgan. So that's how we're using it as an organisation. And then finally, we're very much welcoming the idea of as many views on the wellbeing assessment as we can gather during the consultation process. And what we've been asking as part of the consultation is, do people think that the wellbeing assessment contains all the relevant information and considers the right issues? Do you think that the key issues that we've identified within the assessment are the right ones? Does it feel like the Vale of Glamorgan, and is that reflective of your experience and knowledge of life in the Vale? And then, as Helen was describing, the next steps after agreeing this assessment is looking at a plan for the PSB for the future. So we're asking people as part of the consultation, do they think that they have any ideas about what the PSB should be focusing in on for the future? So that's a really whistle-stop tour through the wellbeing assessment for you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, both Helen and Tom. Enormous amounts of information there. I'd be surprised if any of us took all of that in. The first thing I'm going to ask is that all of those slides are distributed to us afterwards, please, because I think that most of us are going to want to take those away and discuss them in other forums apart from this one. Lots of very interesting stuff as usual. Okay, let's turn to the hands, please. Now, Linda, is this a legacy hand or is this a new hand, please?
Sorry, it's legacy. I thought I'd take.
No, okay, thank you very much. Okay, Christine and then Rachel, please.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom. Yes, there's some very interesting information here. I'll just touch on what you touched on towards the end there about what's missing. Is there anything missing? Is there anything we haven't looked at? And I didn't see anything in there about volunteering. So it'd be good to ask people, we're all about volunteering today, aren't we? If not always. Is there something that would you volunteer? If you were able to, would you volunteer? So we had some questions on volunteering. What would help you to volunteer? What would stand in your way? That would be very interesting data for this committee particularly. The other thing I'd want to say is on loneliness in the rural Vale and the inability to access services. This isn't anything new, and I notice you say you're concerned, and I just wonder how that's going to translate into something, with some real teeth here. Because alcohol, for a long time people view alcohol as something people do when they're self-medicating, and certainly COVID-19 will have caused loneliness in lots of areas generally, but exacerbated in those rural areas where public transport, as you say, is difficult to access, which makes services difficult to access, and so on and so forth. So we'll be looking with great interest to see how you look at that issue. Because, again, volunteering is one of the things people do to avoid loneliness and, to create meaning. And I do know there's a Green Link service in the rural Vale. And I just wonder whether there's some work we could do with the Green Link service if we know loneliness and alcoholism are two key issues from this survey, how we could possibly use Green Links to help people understand how they can reduce loneliness and reduce alcohol intake.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll take Rachel next and then come back to Tom, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just really want to say this is an enormous piece of work that seems to have come around again very, very quickly. Tom was saying how important the information that's gathered through this process is of vital importance to the local authority. It's equally of importance to us in the third sector, because it enables us to look at where the greatest need is and to undertake our own mapping and gapping. And also the information there helps us in bids for financial resources from outside of the area, helping us to make the case and prove the argument and the need for more resource to come into the Vale of Glamorgan. I think that Councillor Cave's points are very valid. We do undertake some questionnaires ourselves about people accessing volunteering and what prevents them from accessing volunteering. Helen and Tom will also know that we've been undertaking a questionnaire amongst third sector around the issue of climate change and the carbon zero target of 2030 and how that's impacting on third sector organisations and how we can engage them and get them to meet that extraordinarily challenging goal. So there are lots and lots of elements within this whole process, and I guess one of the biggest challenges, apart from getting people to engage in it, is then for the Public Service Board to decide what it is that they're going to focus on for the future. And whatever they decide to focus on, there will be criticism, because people will have their own particular areas of interest and that they feel should be focused on. What we've got to do is remember that we're taking this and that we do take this in the round, and we include the work of the Regional Partnership Board that will be focusing on all things health and social care. So it's getting that balance right between partners on the Public Service Board and partners on the Regional Partnership Board, and making sure that we're not duplicating each other's work, which is often a bit of a challenge for us, I think. But again, it's a massive piece of work, and it's a very small team undertaking it, and they should really be congratulated on getting as far as they have with it under the circumstances of the global pandemic. So thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Right, Helen then, please.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Just to come back and say there is a section within the assessment on volunteering, and we did ask a question in the Let's Talk survey itself, and we pulled in some information from the National Wales survey as well, but we can take another look to see whether we can expand on that as well. And I think, again, as part of the development of the assessment, which really, although we have to publish it now in the spring, we do see as a very much an ongoing piece of work as we start to shape the plan. And I think, as Rachel was saying, about having those conversations about what the PSB focuses on and making sure that we're not duplicating, and we're very mindful of the fact that we've got a strong partnership in terms of Safer Vale, we've got the RPB, we're also part of the city region, so actually sort of working through all these different issues to find where the PSB most adds value, I think, in bringing that work together. And as I say, really, I suppose what Tom and I have done in those slides have given you a sort of some of the headlines. There's a lot more information in there, but as you say, in terms of the points that are raised through the consultation, we're going back and sense checking whether we've expanded on things enough and what we need to build on in that next scale of sort of engagement, really, and development of this work through the PSB. And I think really just to say that Lloyd Fisher, who's normally come to the meetings to talk about the assessment, has very much been the officer that's really pulled a lot of this information together, but we've let him have leave for a few days. So that's why we've just got Tom and me tonight. But again, as Rachel said, it has been quite a challenge with the involvement of so many partners across the PSB as well to assist with that.
Okay, thank you very much. Hayley?
Sorry, it took a while then to come off mute.
No,
I'm a bit hoarse too. That is an incredible amount of information to take on board, and I've got lots of notes. But one thing that struck me around the number of internal boards that are meeting and sitting, and I'm just really curious as to the communication strategy internally with the council, and to avoid the duplication, share the most important information so we're not always starting at square one with each department or delivering a presentation in the hope that somebody might gain an interest. It's about the buy-in from the council, the communication within the council, and then how that's kind of supported externally to come out to other agencies. Well, I mean, that's probably an age-old problem, but it does strike me that there's an awful lot of boards meeting and sitting, and I just wonder how they're working together, I suppose. So sorry for detracting a little bit, but I think it's important.
Oh no, I would agree. I think it's a valid point to make, isn't it? And I think that if the system is robust, then it's a question that, you know, should be answered. So don't worry about that. No. Okay, right. Let's go back to Tom, please.
That was a really hard question, Hayley. I think it's important, I suppose, if I can address it from the regional kind of partner, or sorry, the failed partnership angle. So the assessment is hugely valuable for us as an organisation, but it's really important, as Rachel was saying, about how we make the connections across the regional partnership board, the capital region, as well as the public services board. And some of it, I think, is about being really clear about the remits that those partnership boards are actually looking at and which angle they're coming from. So where we might see the city region coming from an economic growth perspective, this information is hugely valuable to them, and we make sure that they have it, and we make sure that our colleagues who are part of those arrangements are taking the Vale perspective there. The Regional Partnership Board is fundamentally important around social care and housing, and again they create their own analysis that looks particularly through that lens, but again we provide this information and they do vice versa. So the trick, I suppose, or the balance for the Public Services Board is almost then to look at what's the gap that we're trying to fill by collectively working together, and it's where collective action adds that additionality to what we're already doing as individual organisations, and that's going to be the piece of work that over the next 3 to 4 months as we draft the plan that we're going to have to give some serious consideration to, so that we're not just trying to tie people together for the sake of it. We're looking at the issues that can really be tackled best in partnership. In terms of the use of the data internally, you're absolutely right about it being an age-old problem. We're quite fortunate, I suppose, that we're a relatively small organisation. There aren't that many of us that are not all on multiple boards, and I suppose the starting point is the council strategic leadership team, who've been really bought into the assessment. So at each stage, we've been playing back the findings to them. We also have an internal board that we call Insight, that brings together people from all of the corporate centre, but importantly our colleagues from each of our service areas as well. And that board is about tackling wicked issues that we don't know the answer to. And this assessment has been presented again to them on a number of occasions, and what we're doing is encouraging them to make the connections so that when they're doing policy development, when they're doing impact assessments, don't go out and try and find all of this stuff again. It's all here in one particular place. And I sat on our decarbonisation board on Friday morning last week, and again we were drawing on some of this information to help shape some of those plans. So I'm not suggesting it's a perfect world by any means, but the conversations are starting to be had, certainly, and I think the point in time assessment, because we do have to do this in this breadth every 5 years, the key now is in which bits can we refresh on a more regular basis so that all of the public service board partners and people who work for those organisations can be accessing that information, and we would have a commitment to make that publicly available so that any of our partners, if they're part of the public services board or not, can get access to this as well. So yeah, that's the sort of process that we're trying to follow, Hayley.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't know if that addresses any of your concerns, Hayley.
Yeah, I suppose it's understanding what the systematic process is, and that there is, you know, a buy-in and an investment to, you know, obviously to real solutions. I know people are working together quite hard to get some of these answers. And I just think about creative ways that the third sector can be engaged further to support that. But again, it needs that integrated approach, rather than, like Tom said, there's a small number of people generally sat on a range of different boards. You know, do changes need to be made? Yeah. Yeah. Maybe another meeting.
Okay. All right. Is anybody else that'd like to come back with it? Helen, is that a legacy hand or is that current, please?
It's a current hand. It was really just to build on sort of that previous conversation, really, to say that as part of the consultation, we're conscious it's a huge thing that we're trying to ask people to engage with in terms of a consultation. But part of what we're trying to do through this is promote the fact the work has been done and that all this information exists, both within the council, across our partners and with other people. So we've held a couple of workshops last week. We had one with staff from all different parts of the council to kind of sense check some of the information, but also again that increasing their knowledge and awareness that this resource exists, how they can use it for whether it's business case or funding bids. And similarly, we had one with a group of external stakeholders again, which was really positive, and it's part of that trying to share what the PSB is doing, but that this work has been done and how we can all use that together, really. So as you say, it's an ongoing piece of work now as we develop this evidence base and develop the plan. So we're hoping to get there.
Okay, thank you. Right, Christine, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just wonder whether Tom wanted to answer the question about, yeah, thank you, because I think it's not been answered. Thanks.
Yeah, he's got his hand up to speak. Okay, Tom.
Yeah, my apologies, Councillor Cave. That was why I had my hand up, because I realised I hadn't addressed the point around making sure that we reflect on this data. And thank you for the suggestion around green links. That's something that I've taken a note of, and I'll certainly go back and have some conversations about how we can potentially use that service to help better connect things. I was going to answer the question around the query on how can we address loneliness and isolation, and actually are we doing anything with this data already, by giving the example of the work that my team, social services, are doing, but really importantly with GVS leading and Age Connects as well within Llantwit Major. We've been looking at a variety of issues within the Western Vale in terms of support for older people, both around the kind of social isolation and loneliness, but also in terms of providing care and support more formally. And I was really, really pleased that colleagues in GVS and Age Connects were so open to the idea of using some of the age-friendly funding that we've had through Welsh Government, but also there's an isolation and loneliness fund as well that Welsh Government have made available. And Rachel and colleagues from Age Connect and myself have been looking at putting together a hub within Llantwit Major. It'll see Age Connects co-locating with, excuse me, with GVS, and putting a range of different funding opportunities available to community groups. So that's an example at a practical level of how we go about this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom. I just wanted to say that, you know, Llantwit Major is obviously not really classed as a rural vale, and it would be good to see a hub within the rural vale. One of the ways that you might want to start looking at this, you know, not only with the voluntary groups that already exist in the rural areas, but through the local community councils that are already there, and quite often are well aware of those people that are lonely and isolated. So it's another approach, isn't it?
Okay, thank you. can I go back to my point, please, about whether we could have all of these slides made available to us as members, please? Because I know that within my own group, there are people who would be very interested in the information, and I would also like it to make it available to fellow members of Penarth Town Council, for example, who won't have access to this. So is that a possibility, please?
Yeah, absolutely not a problem at all. We'll get those sent to Democratic Services in the morning. Right,
okay, thank you very much. Okay, does anybody else want to make a comment on that, or have we come to the end? I've not been notified of any other business, please. Catherine, is there anything else we need to raise, please?
No, if we could just, is there a formal moving of the recommendation, please?
Yes, are we happy to move the recommendation, please?
I'll second.
Thank you very much, Jane.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Everyone
agreed.
else? Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, could we have the date of the next meeting, please?
Give me 2 seconds. Next scheduled meeting is on the 4th of April, Chair.
Right, okay. Yep, in fact, I've already got it in my diary. Goodness me. Right, okay. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope we've had lots to learn tonight. And anyone who's on a community council, it would be good if you would pass on the information that we've just been getting about the Public Services Board out to your members, because I think most of this stuff should be widely available to all of us. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.